God save the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the I Don't Belong Here show, and I am your host, Samantha Benigno. I am a career psychotherapist, a behavioral scientist, a sixth-year PhD candidate in clinical psychology, a master's level psychologist, and I am here breaking down the Karen Read case. Wow, 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 wow. That's all I have to say. I wasn't even going to do this video. I have been trying to focus on getting my stuff together to do lives and wasn't even going to do this video, but I was so amped up after listening to Alan Jackson's Open that I just had to grab the microphone and say something to somebody because I'm all alone. Holy crap, you guys. That was incredible. That was so good. Man, Alan Jackson, is he good at this or what? I mean, that was so good. And I'm so overwhelmed. I mean, not only was he like 600 million times better than Hank, which is okay, on its face, just obvious, right? I don't even need to say that. But I mean, he just hit them with every important detail. And if you saw my last video, I talked about how important the opening statements would be because, especially with Massachusetts jurors, where they are not allowed to go back and reread testimony or watch videos again, where everything that, when they finally do deliberate, it all has to come from memory or from their notes. The opening statement is so important because it's going to put on the jury's radar what to look for, what should stand out as the trial progresses. And if you are somebody who's watched trials closely, and I will admit to you, I have only outside of my mock trial experience in like the 8th grade, the most I have watched a play-by-play trial is in the last year when I started watching the Karen Read case. So you learn a lot really quickly if you watch every day. I start to put the pieces together to understand how the criminal justice system works, but particularly how it works in Massachusetts, which if you listen to attorneys like Mark Betterow or Melanie Little, they're going to tell you that what's going on in Massachusetts is distinctly different from what it's like, here in New York or anywhere else, right? So, and that's not hard to figure out, especially if you've watched, the Alec Baldwin trial or Lori Vallow or any other trial. You can see that there are very clear distinctions. And to me, the importance of opening statements because of how someone's brain is going to then see the information that's presented throughout the trial. Because let's face it, it's dry, it's boring, it drones on and on and on. And so you can get lost. You can get lost in the weeds as a juror listening to this crap day after day, right? Like even today, just listening to the firefighter or the paramedic who, followed AJ's opening statement. Oh, so boring. Like, who cares about why this guy became a firefighter, right? Who cares about the difference between a paramedic and a first responder or whatever it was? So you have to kind of weed through all of that to get to the little nuggets that matter. And so if you have no direction at the level of the brain, if you don't have a way to place the information that's being presented day in and day out in context, you may miss really important stuff. And that's why opening statements matter so much. So this is the same principle. If you've ever, let's say that you get a brand new car, or you're about to get a new car, and all of a sudden a car that you've never noticed before, you've never even seen before, maybe it's a special color, maybe it's a special make and model. And now, as soon as you drive that car off the lot, you start to see that car everywhere. Or let's say you and a friend are talking about, purple butterflies. And then all of a sudden you turn on the TV and you see purple butterflies, right? So That's because of how our brain is situated, how our sensory information is organized. And, we are just as much creating our experience from the inside out as we are from the outside in. There's a very old story that was told for centuries that we're all just kind of these like objective autobaton observers, that once we are taught what things are, right? Like this is lip gloss, this is a pen, this is glue, this is, once we're taught what something is, then everybody experiences that thing as it is. But that is extremely false. In fact, we are more likely to see with what we believe and what we know. We see the world through that lens as opposed to just seeing stuff that's playing out in front of us. So, if you do not tell a jury what to pay attention for, they are not going to know what to pay attention to. They're not going to know whether to listen to the first responder or paramedic drone on and on and on, and any of that is meaningful. And after a while of hearing it and it doesn't seem to be meaningful, why the hell would I pay attention? Right? So, in other words, you need someone to drive the direction of your thinking. And Alan Jackson was a monster today. A monster. How good was Alan Jackson? Oh my God. I was like standing up and cheering. That man, how good was that? I can't get over it. And I was so excited to hear them name things that I had been asking. For example, I had been asking about his body and the frostbite and hypothermia, because it dawned on me that if he was really out there for 6 hours, he probably would have had hypothermia on his fingers. He probably would have had more visible signs of frostbite. Sorry. He probably would have had frostbite on his fingers and on his toes. I mean, he was only wearing a long sleeve shirt. So, he would have had more signs of being weathered, having been out in the cold for 6 hours. I mean, I even went as far as to look up, uh, you know, what under what conditions would somebody develop frostbite and how long would it take? So, in other words, if you were left outside in negative 15 degrees temperature, it might take 30 minutes for frostbite to start. That's how quickly it can happen. Now, it wasn't quite that cold in Canton, Massachusetts at that time. It was around, I want to say like 28 degrees, which makes sense because if you've been in New England for any length of time and it snows, usually it's a little bit warmer as New England winter goes. Not that that's warm, but it's warmer for New England. So let's say he's at 28 degrees Fahrenheit. How long would it take for him to get hypothermia or to start to develop frostbite? And the truth is, he doesn't have signs of that. So I noticed that, but I just didn't think that much of it. I figured, well, if it was a significant issue, it would come up at trial. And then I hadn't heard anything about it. So I was super excited to hear Alan Jackson mention that, because that did strike me as really important. I'm so glad he brought up the DNA with the sneaker and the 5 people. And how awesome is the fact that Hank Brennan set this up so perfectly by overemphasizing the cell phone data and the DNA, by overemphasizing the science and the facts. So to me, this felt like Hank Brennan was almost like doing a favor to the defense. He stresses how important the cell phone information is, how important and how accurate the cell phone data is. It's like, bro, you just told the jury to pay attention to the house long to die in the cold Google search. You just told them to do that. You just told them not to ignore the facts and the science and the data. Like, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you want to bring up DNA and you want to emphasize DNA. Well, then you don't get to just do that and then dismiss the fact that every single piece of clothing that John was wearing and that was tested had multiple people's DNA on it. So you don't get to bring up DNA on one side, but then not use it on the other. And so the fact that Hank Brennan's whole opening statement was about this is about the facts and the science and the cell phone technology, and it's like, unless I'm on another planet, all of those things are in the favor of the defense. Not only that, I was writing down Hank's timeline. This is so screwed up, you guys. I mean, oh, here we go, right? I got to start using my own exercises that I've been including in the description notes, because I gotta skip back to daily meditation, because I can feel myself getting upset too. So we have Hank asserting that John dies at approximately 12:33, sometime like maybe 12:32 and 49 seconds or something, right? So that's the time of the accident, or of the incident. I forget, the collision, I think, is the word that Hank uses. That's the time of the collision. But Karen reconnects with the Wi-Fi at John's house at 12:36. Okay, that came from Trooper Garino. So how did Karen get from the spot where she, collided with John to John's house in 3 minutes? Not only that, Karen actually calls John and leaves a message at 12:33. That would be the exact moment when she allegedly collided with John. So how was she doing that exactly? So she ran him over, backed into him, and then called him immediately? The same time? She was on the phone with him while she backed into him? Is that what they're asserting? I mean, this is just not possible. It's not even silly. It's not even not credible. It's just impossible, right? So it's like, you're telling the jury to pay attention to the facts and the data. Then you present the jury with something that just could not have possibly been true. It is not possible that John O'Keefe was hit by Karen's car at 12:32 and 49 seconds, or whatever it was, and also reconnects to John's Wi-Fi at One Meadows at 12:36. Not possible. Not possible. It is not possible. Even if we say, oh, well, Karen's Wi-Fi connected before she pulled in the driveway. Let's say that Karen's Wi-Fi, John's Wi-Fi, was the best Wi-Fi service the world has ever seen, and somehow it picked Karen up a minute ahead of before she got to the house. It's still not possible. It's not possible. She could not have gotten anywhere near One Meadows by 12:36 if she had hit him at 12:33. Okay? That did not happen. Did not happen. And remember, they got lost when they were driving there. So Karen was really uncertain about where she was going. She did not know these specific roads. And when you're unsure about where you're going, do you drive really, really fast? Do you drive at 60 miles per hour on the back streets when it's just starting to snow? No, you drive slowly because you don't know where you are. You don't know where you're going. And so in order to be able to, get home safely, you have to slow down a little bit. Now, I learned how to drive in New England. I know what those kinds of streets look like. They're very dark, okay, especially when it's a snowstorm. There's not very many people on the roads, and it's hard to see. So even if you're in a residential neighborhood, you're not driving at 75 miles an hour, especially because she didn't know where she was going. So there's no way. This is just total nonsense. Okay. So already out of the gate, Hank Brennan is presenting a theory that is just factually impossible. Okay. Could not have happened. Did not happen that way. Period. There's no other discussion we even need to have, right? What I did think was interesting, though, because, so many of us have been studying this case now for a year or years. I mean, some people have got, several more months, a year and, 9 months or whatever before I stumbled upon this case. So there are people that have been on this for years, right? So if you think about what Hank Brennan was saying, okay, so let's really break it down. Let's really think about what he was saying. He's talking about matching up the ignition and the key cycles, again with the key cycles, with the black box data and John's cell phone temperature changes and John's steps. That's how he's coming to the 12:33 time, okay? But do you see how this confirmation bias now actually works? Rather than going out into the world and saying, all right, well, what actually happened here? Confirmation bias means you have a very clear outcome in mind. Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe. And so when you sit down and try to put all these pieces of data together, what you're doing is like a puzzle where the outcome is already known. So the puzzle in this case is make these pieces of data fit together so that Karen Reed hits John O'Keefe with her car. It doesn't matter if any of it is factually true. It just matters that the pieces fit together. And that is exactly what Hank Brennan is doing here. Like, for example, at one point, he talks about how the Apple steps, right? That it's so accurate. Everything is so accurate. Waze is so accurate, right? But then he gets to the Apple health data and he insinuates that, well, the phone really can't tell if you're moving up and down stairs, but it can tell that you're moving it up and down. And it's like, actually, that's not true. In fact, a study was conducted, and what they found was that it's so accurate, it's 99% accurate as to whether or not the user is climbing stairs, ascending or descending stairs. What it is not accurate to the same degree about is the distance of those stairs. It's not able to say with certainty, how many stairs you climbed and how far you went. So it can't tell the distance, but it absolutely can tell you whether that person was walking up and down stairs. And in that study, they tried everything to recreate that. They tried moving their phones upside down and, driving, and they did all these different things to try to see, is this Apple Health data accurate? And it's very, very accurate, Hank. So the idea that Hank is just inventing, he's just inventing this idea that like, oh yeah, I can't tell stairs, but I mean, so what? It's like, no, that's a fact that we all, because we've taken many, many hours out of our lives to investigate this case, we all know that is absolutely false. Okay. So now we have Hank once again, just outright gaslighting, outright lying, and just praying that the jury doesn't catch it. And I think a lot of the legal stuff that I'm learning more and more as I continue to focus more and more on, criminal justice and our criminal justice system, a lot of this comes down to psychology. A lot of this really is about how to manipulate people's psyche so that they vote in your favor. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. So you're having to always put yourself in the shoes of the jurors and having to always think psychologically about where you are, where do you want them to get, right? What conclusions do you want the jury to eventually make, and how are we going to get there? And I think Alan Jackson's Open did an incredible job of exactly that. He took us by the hand and he walked us through every important bit of information that we needed to get to reasonable doubt. And there's so much more he could have said, but he doesn't have to, because just those bits of information are so critical. Those are factual. Those are non-negotiable. John didn't have frostbite, period. Full stop, as Alan Jackson likes to say. He didn't have frostbite, okay? The injuries to his arm matched dog bites and dog scratches, but truly dog bites. So if you had seen the video that I had done pretty recently where I compared the different injuries, where you can see what it looks like when somebody's killed by a pack of dogs, what it looks like when somebody gets run over by a car or gets into a car accident or has imprints or indentations on their body from having hit the front of a car or whatever the case may be. You also can see what it looks like when somebody gets into a fight, what it looks like if you're, in a boxing ring with someone. So you can get a sense, literally comparing John's injuries to other injuries. And what you're going to find is those marks on John's arm are so consistent with dog bites. And we're going to hear, it appears we're going to hear a lot about that. So I'm really glad that the defense is focusing more on that this time, is really going to drive that point home because it's a critical point. There's just no way to explain those marks on John's arm from a taillight. There's just not. There's not without like contorting your body into like 100 different positions to try to make that happen. It's just not possible. If they're trying to say that the taillight was injured by John, then how would it simultaneously have left all of these imprints on his arm? It's just absurd. Just absurd, right? So that's really important. And I would encourage you to check that video out because it helps. It really helps you to think, oh, wow, this is what it would look like if you were hit by a car or if just your arm was hit by a car or whatever the case may be. They also bring up the medical examiner. The defense mentions Dr. Scortibello, which is huge. The fact that she would not change her manner of death from undetermined. That yes, it's common for medical examiners to start out with an undetermined designation, but as they go through and they get all of those investigation notes from the police who they work so closely with, they will change it. It will be upgraded to homicide. We don't have that here. She's withstood the pressure from Proctor and Buchanan and all the other, to Chico and all these other guys in the MSP, and the guys, all the other troopers that work in the DA's office. And then the biggest, maybe the most important detail when we're talking purely about reasonable doubt, the biggest problem that the Commonwealth has in this case is Trooper Michael Proctor. Because yes, he was suspended during the last trial, but now he is fired. He is terminated. He is gone. And he's gone because of his behavior directly related to this case. Now, if I'm a juror, how do I get past that? That is basically an admission. That's basically the DA's office or whoever Michael Proctor's bosses are making the determination that he should be fired because of his actions in direct accordance with this case. That says a lot, right? And like Alan Jackson said today during opening statements, you know how hard it is to get fired from the Massachusetts State Police? It is not easy to get fired, right? You might get forced retirement, but to be fired, to be let go, there has to be an investigation, right? And all of that happened. That's why he was on suspension for so long. So that is a huge problem for the Commonwealth. Remember, the defense only has to create enough reasonable doubt to a moral certainty. So if you're a juror, how do you get past Michael Proctor? Because that just plants doubt about everything in this case. Absolutely everything. Because he's the lead investigator. He outright never investigates any other option besides Karen Reed. And like I was saying before, The reason why you'll always hear about confirmation bias with cops in and out, every true crime show there that has ever been. The reason why confirmation bias is so important is because it's the difference between trying to pull pieces into a story that you've already created versus being willing to create a story out of the puzzle pieces that you find. That's so different. And in our brain, we approach the situation completely differently. And when you think about Brennan talking about the black box from Karen's Lexus, when you talk about the Apple Health data and the temperature data from the phone and the text messages and whatever, and him trying to piece those things together. Well, yeah, if you start out with a false premise and then you try to make those pieces fit that false premise, you may come up with a working theory, but it isn't ever going to be the truth. It's still just going to be a BS working theory that in your mind makes sense because you started out with a false premise. That's the problem with this case. That's what the Commonwealth has been doing from the second this all started. That's what Michael Proctor was doing also. And because, remember, you always have to remember, nobody ever thought the eyes of the world would be on this case. So what was the big deal? What was the harm in throwing a few taillight pieces down to ensure her guilt? Because he never knew that, like, the world's greatest accident reconstructionist were going to be put on the case to try to piece those taillight pieces back together in a way that made scientific sense. And when it doesn't, it doesn't. And that was the centerpiece of Alan Jackson's argument today.
The evidence in this case will establish above everything else 3 points. There was no collision with John O'Keefe. There was no collision. There was no collision. John O'Keefe did not die from being hit by a vehicle. Period. The facts will show that. The evidence will show that. The data will show that. The science will show that. And the experts will tell you that. You'll learn that the Commonwealth has pinned its entire case on a brazen and a flawed assertion that is untethered, unconnected to the facts and to the evidence.
John was not hit by a car. That was it. John was not hit by a car. And if John was not hit by a car, Karen Reed didn't do this. And if Karen Reed didn't do this, somebody else did. We can talk about that all day in all of these different ways, but that's the bottom line. And that is the bottom line. And then in the context of Proctor, he starts to bring up during the opening statement all these other loaded relationships. Proctor's relationship with the Alberts and how the Alberts had all of these people, all these like tentacles in the community with Chris Albert, sitting on the select board who oversees like funding to the police, with Kevin Albert and Kevin Albert being involved in important testimony prep for some of the witnesses. From Brennan's opening statement, it's very clear that what he has built this entire case around is the idea that Karen said, "I hit him." The problem with that is those statements were never brought forward, were never documented. Nowhere is there any mention of the "I hit him" statements in the transcripts. No paramedics, no first responders, none of that came forward till much later. And of course, no matter what they believe, and I'm sure some of them do believe it. You heard today from Timothy Nuttall. He's the paramedic. He's one of these guys who's trying to say that, "Oh, I'm so sure. And I believe he believes he's telling the truth. I don't think that he's intentionally fabricating, but you can see how easy it would be to, it's sort of like when, think back to a picture that that you've seen 100 times in your life. Maybe it was a photo that was on the wall at like your parents' home or your grandparents' home. You're 5 years old, you're 7 years old. you really don't remember that moment, but you have what seems to be some version of a memory of that moment, very likely because of that image that you walked by 100 times whenever you went to go visit your grandparents. It's very similar here. That is how memory works. And the problem with memory is every time you bring a memory back to the surface, it gets put back colored by whatever's going on now. So memory is incredibly unreliable. Now to have all these people, well-intended or not, coming forward to say, oh, I hit him, but there was no mention of that in the first day or 3 days or weeks or months after this incident with John happens, it's very hard to buy that it is true. Even if I'm sitting on the jury and I believe that Timothy Nuttall believes what he's saying. He seems like a decent human. He doesn't seem like he's a liar inherently. But is he getting his 15 minutes of fame? To me, it seems a little bit like he's excited to be a part of all of this, wants to kind of be like a good boy, for lack of a better way to say it, and was excited to have Hank take an interest in him. And he said he had 3 meetings with Hank Brennan, over the last couple of months. That's very interesting. The fact that Officer Tully, Brian Tully, was there. Who's Tully? Tully is Michael Proctor's boss. So you have the boss. He's the lieutenant. He's like the big boss of the MSP, of the Massachusetts State Police officers that work out of the district attorney's office that's stationed in Canton. Tully's the big boss. He's the one in the meetings with Morrissey and with the chief of police. Those are the 3 like big dogs that are making all of the decisions. So when you hear that name, when you hear Brian Tully, you pay attention because he's no dum-dum, that's for sure. But he is directly involved, has his hands in all of this. And he is one of those people that when Proctor says in his text messages, the powers that be want answers, Tully's one of the powers that be, right? These are the powers that be. And the powers that be were doing this interview with Timothy Nuttall, right? That's who was doing the interview in preparation for today's trial, for him being brought on the stand and recounting the I hit him statements, which now have completely changed again. So during the last trial, there was 2 statements of I hit him at a completely different time. This time around, there's 3 versions. 3 times she says I hit him, and that's a completely new, separate incident in addition to the I hit him that he was hearing off in a distance somewhere. And again, remember, none of these statements were ever brought forward at the time. They were never documented. They weren't written in anybody's reports. They were never passed along to the police. They were never passed along to Michael Proctor. So do you think that he's more likely to have remembered them now or then?
I hit him came up. It was 3 times.
And were you advised that that's not what you said at your testimony last year?
No,
sir. 2 times?
What was that?
You said it was 2 times last year?
I honestly can't recall, sir.
Okay, but you just saw that, or you just read that and went over that 3 weeks ago.
I believe so, sir, yeah.
But you can't remember, as you sit here today, just 3 weeks ago, what y'all discussed in terms of how many times you previously testified that you heard the phrase, I hit him.
So previously testified possibly to 2, but it was 3.
Okay, your memory is clearer now than it was, for instance, a year ago when you testified.
Repeat that?
Sure. Your memory is clearer now, as you sit here, that it was 3 times you heard that, than it was a year ago when you testified that it was 2 times.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Does your memory get better with time generally? Your memory. I'm not talking about the royal you. I'm talking about you.
In certain settings, I mean, there are certain things about different aspects that I recall better than others. Okay. And does your memory tend to get better, or does it fade over time? That's my question. It can fade over time, but it depends on the context.
But in this case, you're telling this jury that your memory is better now than it was a year ago when you testified about the exact same circumstance, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And that's sort of what Alan Jackson's trying to point out. And then Brendan, our Brennan gets very incensed by that. He's really angry that Alan Jackson kind of blows up his spot and says, this is absurd. You're telling a completely different story. And during the last trial, you swore up and down that John had full winter coat, puffy jacket on, and there was no puffy jacket. So it's so absurd, right? And you can kind of see that this is kind of his 15 minutes of fame, that this guy is kind of like feeling like the big man, that he's a part of all of this. And I think that's kind of endearing. I think he seems like a very decent person, a nice guy, whatever. But, you just kind of like inserting yourself in the middle of the fire here. And I don't know that the payoff is worth the damage that it could do, because you want to be involved, because you want to be, invited to the party. And in order to do that, you suddenly remember the I hit him situation completely differently than you did the first 7 times that, you recounted this sequence of events. When I first heard the 2 opening statements on a scale of 0 to 100, what would be the score that I would give Hank Brennan and Alan Jackson? I would say I would give Hank about a 40 out of 100 for his opening statements. Pretty concise. He told a story. A lot of it was just totally nonsense, but whatever, fine, engaging-ish. I wasn't asleep after, the hour or so that it went on for. And then when I think about Alan Jackson, that was just such a home run. Like, his opening statements were just amazing. They were so good. I don't have a lot to compare it to, so it's hard for me to say, but I would have to give that like an 89%, only because I'm not sure what 100% would look like. But man, he was so good. He just hit every major important point right out the gate. He was so impressive. So we got to give him like an 89% starting position. So the defense started off today with a much, just with a great advantage. They were just so hot coming out of the gate. Then as the day went on and this, Nuttall, paramedic witness, there was some back and forth. I would say there were some moments that, Nuttall made a case that he heard Karen say, I hit him. There's a few moments where the defense looked a little shoddy because, of a video. It really wasn't important to, it isn't even important to address. It was small and insignificant. The moment that stood out for me, and I'm obviously biased because, clearly I want to see the defense do well. There was a moment where Alan Jackson, when he first starts cross-examining the paramedic, he asks, what did you do to prep for today? Like, who did you prep with? How many times did you prep? What did you guys talk about? And he kind of catches him saying that, they prepared him to talk about the I hit him statements, to make sure that he hadn't folded on the I hit him statements, that even though they were different, it was different testimony than the last time, that, he was still committed as of last night to his I hit him statements. And he tells us that Brian Tully was involved in that preparation. That was important. Now, that's important to me because I know who Brian Tully is. Is that important to the jury? Probably not yet. Are they going to remember that? Probably not. But if the jury just sort of is able to discount, just kind of say, this guy's memory is so shaky, we really can't. How much can we trust it? You also, by the way, and this is really funny, you also had Hank Brennan in the opening statement today stressing not to give a tremendous amount of credence to memory and eyewitness testimony. You had him saying, pay attention to the facts, the facts and the science. So this is the first guy that he sort of throws up there, right? It just doesn't make any sense. All right, so there's that. Then Carrie Roberts starts to testify. Did anything come out there? You know, at least not yet. I mean, she was probably only a third of the way through, I'm guessing. I'm really not so sure that anything important or new or critical came up there. You know, they show Carrie the tail light from afar, and you can barely see anything. There's snow covering it, and she identifies that a big piece is missing. But again, from the jury's perspective, it's the car, the shot of the car. So it's a photo. And it's the photo you've seen outside of John's house in the driveway with the two, Karen's SUV, and then John's right next to it. You really just don't see much, right? I mean, there's snow covering the entire back of the car. It's impossible to make anything out of that that's terribly significant, would be my say on that. One thing I think is going to backfire really terribly on Hank Brennan also is his use or misuse of Karen Read's statements.
I remember it, but I question, do I remember it because it's been relived so much? I mean, when I see the video of me driving from the waterfall, like what I just described, tapping the brakes when I crossed the intersection, Washington over Sherman Street, do I actually remember that I kind of slowly proceeded through that green light? No, I don't actually remember that. But I've seen the video so many times that you then question, did I remember on my own? Or was my memory jogged? But I also wondered, did I say, could I have hit him? Or was it told to me that I said I hit him? And I knew I never could have said that, so the closest I must have said was, did I hit him? I know I said I hit him, but did I really say it as many times as law enforcement's claiming I said it?
Because, again, with the confirmation bias, if I believe wholeheartedly that she's guilty, and then I see a video like the clip he showed where she's making a statement about how John looked when he was lying there dead or dying in the snow.
I mean, I didn't think I hit him, but could I have clipped him? Could I have tagged him in the knee and incapacitated him? He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see, but could I have done something that knocked him out and in drunkenness and in the cold didn't come to again?
And this would have been the moment you dropped him off at the party.
Yeah, would have had to.
One thing that's also important to note, after we hear Karen Read make that statement, Hank Brennan then goes on and uses that phrase, clipped him, when she clipped him. The problem with I clipped him and Hank Brennan using that framing is that the injuries to John O'Keefe do not imply that he was clipped, right? To be clipped means like I got a little tear in my sweatshirt. It does not imply that I wound up with a gaping hole in the back of my head, an arm that looks like I was mangled by a tiger, and two golf ball sized hematomas sticking out of my eyeballs. So while this is a cute reframing of Karen Read's statements, and you pray to God that the jury sees it the way that you do, from my perspective, these statements, they seem more exonerating, because if she's guilty, what the hell is she doing talking about clipping John? And when you listen to Karen in those statements, she doesn't stutter, she doesn't fumble with her words, she doesn't seem uncomfortable. She seems to be recounting without consciousness of guilt what she was experiencing that night. If you already decide, and if you've already decided that she's guilty, then okay, sure, you might see that interview, you might hear that statement and twist it, bend yourself into whatever configuration to ensure that that statement aligns with your theory. But this is the thing that is so maddening about the Commonwealth. First, consciousness of guilt. Let's talk about what consciousness of guilt means, because it comes up around this case all the time, and Hank Brennan especially loves that. He loves there's evidence of consciousness of guilt. He loves to say that in reference to Karen Read. And here's the thing, you guys. The reason why Karen made those statements, despite her lawyers and any other logical determination or judgment to the contrary. The fact that all of us would say, Karen, probably not such a great idea that you just make all these statements publicly, because somebody like Hank Brennan can twist and mold your words into whatever configuration he wants. But if you did not do this, if there is not consciousness of guilt, if you know you didn't hit him, what does it matter what you say to whoever you say it to? There is nothing you're trying to hide. And you may not like Karen Read. You may not love her fiery personality. But one thing is for sure, she does not hold back. There is not a sense of consciousness of guilt. She does not seem guilty of anything, and therefore doesn't feel threatened by the idea of speaking her truth to the world. So, but when we do look for evidence of consciousness of guilt in this case, there's a lot of it. So if you want to know what consciousness of guilt looks like, go back and rewatch the Brian Albert, Brian Higgins, and Jennifer McGabe and Colin Albert. Go watch those 4 testimonies start to finish. Because riddled up and down and back and forth in those 4 testimonies, almost every statement past the first 7 questions that Lally asks, there's just consciousness of guilt all over the place. For example, why not just own the butt dials? Who cares if you called Brian Higgins? If I didn't do anything wrong, why wouldn't I just go on TV and scream from the rooftops, this woman is nuts? I have nothing to do with this. I was just in my home, drunk. And I slept through the first responders. Who cares? Right? Why does Colin Albert have the worst case of amnesia the world has ever seen? But only in reference to the 24 hours surrounding January 28th and 29th, 2022. Why does he just not remember anything that happened? Why is Jen McCabe's phone doing magical things like deleting all this stuff? And then, when she's asked about it, she just utterly refuses. I don't know how to delete anything, but just so strange because the only things that are deleted on your phone, Jen, are things that would make you look guilty. In this case, what is going on here? And again, if you didn't do anything wrong and there's no consciousness of guilt, there's no awareness of nothing to hide, nothing to see here, why not do interviews all day long and just say whatever you want? And that's the thing about Karen Read. That's what she's doing here. That's why, that's why they have to bend over backwards and make stuff up using her statements. And that's my point. The whole point of me saying what I'm saying right now is to say this next bit. I think these are going to backfire badly on Hank Brennan. Now, I realize he only needs one to believe she did this to hang the jury. Okay? He only needs one. I get that. However, when you listen to those statements in context, and even not in context, even just what they showed, it was pretty obvious to the point where she even makes the correction in the statement that she's making what she actually meant. Right? In other words, she's asked, I forget the name of the Dateline host. I should know. Oh my God, I've probably watched 10,000 Datelines. I can't remember the name of the host.
He didn't look mortally wounded as far as I could see.
Hank Brennan, even before he shows that clip, is using those words as if to insinuate that Karen saw him and left him there. Now, let's think about this logically, okay? If Karen had intentionally murdered John, Is the insinuation then, Hank, that she would have hit him with her car, got out, looked at him, and seen that he wasn't mortally wounded and just thought, yeah, so what? There's going to be a blizzard. He doesn't even have a jacket or shoes on. I'm just going to leave him here and, someone's going to find him. He wasn't mortally wounded. Just leave him here. I mean, is that what Hank is suggesting happened? Because, that also, by the way, adds some time. And Karen only has 2.5 minutes after she collides with John's body to get back to his house, where she then reconnects with his Wi-Fi at 12:36. So that slows everything down a bit. I don't know how she's going to fit that into his timeline. The absurdity, right? So I actually think that his statements, his use of her words is going to backfire. I think that this jury, the majority of them are going to be smart enough to not only not agree that those statements are evidence of her being guilty, but actually make it seem as though Hank is lying to them. Make it seem as though Hank Brennan is intentionally selecting words from Karen's interviews and then twisting them for the jury to make it look like she's saying something else. And if that's the case, if even one of those jurors thinks that, has that thought at some point, like, wait a minute, that's not what she was saying there, he's in trouble. Because what that means is from that point on, they don't trust him anymore. They don't trust what he's presenting. They don't trust how he's presenting it. They don't buy into Hank Brennan. And I knew that it was an advantage to the defense to have Hank trying this case and not Adam Lally, because Adam Lally, like I've said many times, you felt bad for, you feel bad for. You don't feel bad for Hank Brennan, not even a little bit. He's arrogant. He's self-righteous. He's gaslights everywhere. He invents stories, and he's a storyteller. I mean, I think that's the thing that I'm getting after today's testimony. You know that he likes story time. Like the fact that he led with the firefighters, I hit him stuff. It's like, this is your best evidence. You want to lead with I hit him. Yet that is not written anywhere in any report by anybody when they hand their reports over to the police. You don't think that would be like that would be like an important detail to put down? Like when you know that the investigators are going to be trying to figure out what happened to him? You don't think saying, oh yeah, his girlfriend said she hit him? I don't think that this firefighter is a bad person. I don't think he's trying to maliciously undermine Karen Reed. I just think he doesn't remember correctly what happened. I mean, and it doesn't even matter even if he did. Even if she did say that, because of the psychological profile of Karen Reed, I am 100% confident that the reason that she would have said that is because there are narcissistic qualities about Karen Reed. And because of that, of course, she was going to immediately think she had something to do with it, because that's how she sees everything, right? She's projects herself into all these situations. All right, that is it for me. Huge day today. I think it was a strong showing for the defense. And, it reminds me that there's going to be all these ups and downs. It is going to be a long trial. And, we got to take it one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. But when all is said and done, I feel good for the first time since, when the first trial started last year. I feel like this is it's a new day. I feel like Karen can win this. We'll see. On the whole, strong day for the defense, and we will see what tomorrow will bring.
God save the Commonwealth.